William Wallace, the Scottish hero who defied an empire from freedom fighter to martyr. Welcome to Tales Labyrinth, where we navigate the most compelling stories from history with authenticity, depth, and cinematic storytelling. Today, we explore the extraordinary life of William Wallace, Scotland's greatest hero whose courage defied an empire and inspired a nation. This is William Wallace, the Scottish hero who defied an empire, a journey through medieval Scotland's struggle for freedom and independence. Stay with us until the end as we reveal the true story of the man who became legend and the brutal price he paid for unwavering defiance. First, birth of a rebel in medieval Scotland. In the year 1270, somewhere in the lowlands of Scotland, a child is born who will one day shake the foundations of English power. William Wallace enters a world of thatched cottages, stone churches, and the harsh realities of life under feudal rule and foreign domination. His father is a minor landowner, a knight of modest means, who holds land near Paisley in service to a greater Scottish lord. The family lives in a timber and stone hall, not a grand castle but a respectable dwelling that marks them as minor nobility. Young William grows tall and strong. His education including not just martial training but Latin from local clergy who recognize his keen intelligence. He learns the claymore's weight, the bow's draw, and the riding skills essential for any young man of knightly station in medieval Scotland. The Scotland of his youth exists in political turmoil following the death of King Alexander III, whose heir dies leaving the succession in dispute. English King Edward I, called Longshanks for his imposing height, seizes this opportunity to assert control over Scotland's throne and future. Edward installs John Balliol as a puppet king, treating Scotland as a vassal state rather than an independent kingdom with ancient sovereignty. English garrisons occupy Scottish castles, English officials collect taxes, and English law supersedes Scottish custom in this new colonial arrangement. Wallace witnesses the gradual erosion of Scottish independence as English soldiers swagger through towns, demanding tribute and respect from resentful populations. The humiliation burns in the hearts of proud Scots who remember their kingdom's former glory and independence before English intervention. In 1296, Edward strips even the pretense of Scottish sovereignty, forcing Balliol's abdication and claiming direct rule over Scotland as conquered territory. The English king removes the Stone of Scone, ancient symbol of Scottish kingship, carrying it to Westminster as a trophy of conquest. Wallace, now a young man in his mid-40s, refuses to swear allegiance to Edward, as many Scottish nobles pragmatically do to preserve their lands. This refusal marks him as an outlaw, a man outside the protection of law, whose life can be taken without legal consequence. Legend tells of a confrontation with English soldiers in Lanark, where Wallace kills the sheriff in revenge for murdering his young wife Marion. Whether entirely true or embellished, the story captures the personal grievances that transform individual anger into revolutionary commitment and national resistance. Wallace flees to the forests and hills, joining other outlaws and dispossessed Scots who refuse to accept English domination of their homeland. In these wild places, far from English garrisons and collaborating nobles, the seeds of rebellion take root among desperate men with nothing to lose. Second, the Stirling Bridge triumph. By the summer of 1297, Wallace has emerged as leader of a growing rebel army composed of commoners, lesser knights, and dispossessed farmers. His forces raid English supply lines, ambush isolated garrisons, and disappear into Scotland's forests and hills before reinforcements arrive in strength. Unlike the cautious Scottish nobles who protect their lands through accommodation with English power, Wallace fights with single-minded ferocity and purpose. His army swells as word spreads of a leader who refuses compromise, who promises not accommodation but freedom through victory or death. The English commanders dismiss Wallace as a low-born brigand leading peasant rabble, underestimating both his military genius and his men's desperate courage. They send a substantial force north under John de Warenne, Earl of Surrey, confident that professional English knights will easily crush this Scottish rabble. The armies converge at Stirling, where a narrow wooden bridge crosses the River Forth beneath the shadow of Stirling Castle's imposing walls. Wallace surveys the landscape with tactical brilliance, recognizing that the bridge's narrowness neutralizes English numerical superiority and heavy cavalry advantage. On September 11, 1297, the English army begins crossing the bridge in the early morning, their mounted knights clattering across the wooden planks. Wallace waits with disciplined patience as more English soldiers crowd onto the bridge and the northern bank, allowing them to commit to their exposed position. When sufficient English forces have crossed, isolating them from reinforcements, Wallace signals the attack with devastating timing and coordination. Scottish spearmen surge forward in dense formations, their long spears creating impenetrable walls that horses cannot penetrate without impaling themselves on iron points. The English cavalry, trapped on the narrow ground between river and Scottish spears, cannot maneuver or effectively charge in their favored tactical style. Horses scream and thrash as they're brought down. Knights in heavy armor tumble into mud and water, drowning under the weight of their own protection. English soldiers still crossing the bridge panic and retreat, creating chaos as those trying to advance collide with those fleeing backward in terror. The bridge collapses under the weight and confusion, dumping dozens of armored soldiers into the river, where many drown in swirling current. The battle becomes a massacre as Wallace's men systematically destroy the trapped English force, showing no mercy to an enemy that showed Scotland none. The Earl of Surrey flees south with survivors, leaving thousands of English dead on Scottish soil in one of medieval history's most complete tactical victories. News of Stirling Bridge electrifies Scotland, proving that English power can be challenged and defeated through courage, clever tactics, and unified resistance. Wallace becomes an instant legend, the commoner who defeated professional English knights, the patriot who restored Scottish pride and military reputation, third, guardian of Scotland's freedom. In the aftermath of Stirling Bridge, Scottish nobles recognise Wallace's achievement by appointing him Guardian of Scotland in the name of the exiled King John Balliol. This unprecedented honour for a man of minor noble birth reflects both his military success and the vacuum of leadership among Scotland's cautious aristocracy. Wallace establishes his authority from the forests and fields rather than castles, maintaining the guerrilla flexibility that brought victory at Stirling Bridge. He organises supply lines, coordinates local resistance, and attempts to forge Scotland's fractious clans and regions into a unified military force. The Guardian raids deep into northern England during the winter of 1297, burning towns and seizing supplies in retaliation for English devastation of Scotland. These raids serve both practical purposes of gathering resources and psychological goals of demonstrating that Scotland can strike back against its oppressor. Wallace attempts to gain international recognition for Scottish independence, sending letters to merchants in Lubeck and Hamburg requesting trade and diplomatic support. These efforts reveal his understanding that military victory alone cannot secure independence without economic viability and international legitimacy and recognition. Yet his position grows increasingly precarious as powerful Scottish nobles, jealous of his authority and protective of their own lands, withhold full support. The aristocracy never fully embraces this commoner guardian, preferring to negotiate privately with English officials to preserve their estates and privileges. King Edward I, humiliated by Stirling Bridge, prepares a massive invasion force to crush the Scottish rebellion and personally restore English control. The English king gathers the largest army seen in Britain in generations, determined to make an example of Wallace and extinguish Scottish resistance. In July 1298, Edward's enormous army crosses into Scotland, a professional force of armoured knights, Welsh longbowmen, and thousands of infantry soldiers. Wallace initially employs guerrilla tactics, refusing pitched battle while harassing English supply lines and burning crops to deny the invaders sustenance and resources. But Edward's army corners Wallace at Falkirk, forcing the battle that the Scottish Guardian has tried desperately to avoid against overwhelming numbers. Wallace arranges his spearmen in circular formations called schiltrans, hedgehog-like defensive positions designed to repel cavalry charges through dense spear walls. The Battle of Falkirk begins with English cavalry charges that break against Scottish spear formations, the horses refusing to impale themselves on the bristling weapons. For a time, Wallace's tactics hold, his disciplined spearmen maintaining formation despite thunderous cavalry charges from England's finest mounted knights. But Edward deploys his Welsh longbowmen, who rain arrows into the densely packed Scottish formations from safe distance, killing with impunity. The Schiltrans cannot advance without breaking formation, cannot retreat without chaos, and cannot survive the sustained arrow storm that decimates their ranks relentlessly. Fourth, betrayal and capture. Wallace escapes the disaster at Falkirk, but his position as guardian becomes untenable after the catastrophic defeat and heavy Scottish losses. He resigns his authority, passing leadership to Scottish nobles, who immediately begin negotiating terms with Edward, rather than continuing the armed resistance. For the next 7 years, Wallace becomes a fugitive, moving through Scotland and possibly traveling to France, seeking military and diplomatic support. Some accounts place him at the French court, others in Rome appealing to the Pope. Though historical records of these years remain frustratingly sparse, he continues to symbolize resistance even in absence, his name alone inspiring sporadic rebellions and giving hope to Scots unwilling to accept permanent English domination. Edward I obsesses over capturing Wallace, offering rewards and issuing proclamations declaring him an outlaw whose capture would be richly compensated. By 1305, Edward has largely pacified Scotland through a combination of military force and negotiated settlements with pragmatic Scottish nobles. These aristocrats accept English overlordship in exchange for keeping their lands, choosing survival and prosperity over continued futile resistance and devastation. Wallace remains the one significant holdout, refusing all offers of clemency or pardon, maintaining that Scotland's independence is non-negotiable regardless of consequences. His absolute refusal to compromise makes him increasingly isolated, a man out of time whose inflexibility alienates even former supporters and allies. On August 5, 1305, Scottish knight John de Menteith betrays Wallace's location to English officials near Glasgow in exchange for lands and titles. The betrayal comes from a fellow Scotsman, reflecting the tragic reality that Scotland's greatest enemy often proves to be its own divided nobility. English soldiers surround Wallace's refuge, capturing him without the dramatic battle that might have been fitting for so legendary a warrior and fighter. He is bound in chains and transported south to London, paraded through streets as a captured rebel to demonstrate English power over Scottish resistance. Wallace arrives at Westminster Hall, where Edward has prepared a show trial designed to humiliate the Scottish hero before his execution and final destruction. The charges include treason, though Wallace argues he cannot betray a king he never recognized, having always fought for Scotland's legitimate independence. The trial is predetermined, its outcome certain, existing only to provide legal veneer for the brutal execution Edward has planned as warning to future rebels. Wallace is denied the right to speak in his own defense, his words and justifications considered irrelevant to the political theater unfolding. Fifth, the brutal price of defiance. On August 23, 1305, William Wallace is dragged through London's streets, tied to a horse's tail, pelted with refuse by crowds summoned to witness his humiliation. The once proud guardian of Scotland endures this degradation with stoic silence, his dignity maintained even in circumstances designed to strip it away completely. He arrives at Smithfield, the execution ground where England disposes of traitors through the horrific ritual of hanging, drawing, and quartering. This punishment, reserved for those who commit high treason, represents medieval justice at its most deliberately cruel and psychologically devastating to witnesses. Wallace is stripped naked and hanged by the neck, but cut down before death, so he remains conscious for the horrors to follow. The executioner then disembowels him while alive, burning his entrails before his eyes in a grotesque display meant to terrorize potential rebels. Through unimaginable agony, witnesses report that Wallace refuses to beg for mercy or recant his cause, maintaining defiance even as his body is destroyed. His final reported words are prayers for Scotland's freedom, transforming his execution from English triumph into demonstration of unbreakable Scottish spirit and resolve. Finally, Wallace is beheaded and his body quartered, the sections sent to Newcastle, Berwick, Stirling, and Perth as grisly warnings against rebellion. His head is placed on a spike on London Bridge, displayed as a trophy meant to prove that English power cannot be successfully challenged. Yet Edward's brutal spectacle achieves the opposite of its intended effect, transforming Wallace from defeated rebel into immortal martyr for Scottish independence. The execution's savagery shocks even medieval sensibilities, creating sympathy for Wallace and disgust at English tyranny among Scots and international observers alike. Within a year, Robert the Bruce raises the banner of Scottish independence, inspired partly by Wallace's sacrifice and the national consciousness it awakened. Bruce will succeed where Wallace failed, winning independence at Bannockburn in 1314. building on the foundation of resistance that Wallace's sacrifice established. Wallace's legacy transcends his military victories and defeats, embodying the principle that some causes justify any sacrifice and that freedom outweighs survival itself. 7 centuries later, his story still resonates as testament to individual courage against overwhelming power and the enduring human desire for self-determination. The Scottish hero who defied an empire lies scattered across Britain, yet his spirit remains unified and immortal in Scotland's national consciousness. William Wallace died in agony, but achieved immortality, proving that ideas and principles can outlive even the most brutal attempts to destroy them. William Wallace's journey from minor nobleman to legendary martyr reveals the power of unwavering principle against overwhelming force and political pragmatism. We've witnessed how one man's refusal to compromise inspired a nation, challenged an empire, and ultimately paid the ultimate price for his convictions. Tales Labyrinth has guided you through medieval Scotland's darkest and most inspiring chapter, revealing the true man behind the enduring legend. Wallace's story reminds us that courage and sacrifice can alter history's course, that individuals matter, and that some principles transcend personal survival. If this exploration of medieval heroism and sacrifice has moved you, please share your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. Support Tales Labyrinth with a like and subscribe to continue journeying through history's most compelling stories of courage, tragedy, and triumph. Share this video with those who appreciate authentic historical storytelling that honors both the complexity and inspiration of our shared human past. Thank you for navigating Tales Labyrinth with us as we continue exploring the heroes, villains, and pivotal moments that shaped our world.